Welcome, everybody, back to the second episode of Degen Frens NFT Podcast. I'm your host with my co-host, Matt McKeever. I'm Dan the Lost Boy. And on today's episode, we're going to go a little bit different than usual. We typically kind of have our segments and things like that, but we're going to dive into a special subject. But before we get to that, we'll go into our usual kind of disclaimer about, this is meant for entertainment purposes. This is just a podcast of two Degen friends sharing their opinions. If you need legal advice, go seek that. This is not it. Just our opinions about what's going on in Web3 and NFTs and all that Degen stuff. So without further ado, Matt, welcome.
Hey, Dan. Yeah, really excited. I know it's only taken us 2 episodes to kind of derail the show's platform or the setup that we've got here, but I think it's worthwhile. There's just been so much going on in the world of NFTs since we initially committed to doing this show to now, right? Like literally it's only been 15 days, but when NFT and Web3 is busy, 15 days can literally feel like a decade. I honestly don't feel like I'm overstating myself at this point, but yeah, can I just kind of jump into it? Because I know there's so much I want to cover here.
I think we should, Matt. I think I'm a little bit like jittery because I want to just get right into it because there is so much happening and so much to kind of unpack, and we'll just dive right in. So go right ahead, Matt.
So I think the first thing that we'll just kind of bring up, and we briefly discussed this in the previous episode. So if you guys haven't checked out episode 1, please make sure that you at least consider subscribing to the channel, check out that episode, smash the like button, all that good stuff. But we were talking about Yuga Labs acquiring Larva Labs and the implications behind all that. And honestly, that's probably a big enough story in and of itself, but that ended up kind of getting, overshadowed essentially by the announcement that Yuga Labs was doing a fundraise. And so they essentially got a valuation of $4 billion for Yuga Labs, which is mind-boggling. But then in addition to that, they also launched ApeCoin. So before we maybe go down the ApeCoin rabbit hole, I thought I'd just talk about the raise that the company did, because I think it's really worthwhile for people to kind of understand how new this company is, how big it appears that people are actually viewing it to be. And again, there's just a lot going down. So the first thing I'm going to pull up, this is just a tweet from Joe Pompliano. So Pomp says, Yuga Labs, the creator of Bored Apes, has raised $450 million and is now valued at $4 billion. Their 2021 financials are wild. Revenue of $138 million, net profit of $127 million. That's a 92% margin. The company was founded just 14 months ago and only had 11 full-time employees in January. And yeah, this is honestly mind-boggling in my opinion. And for anyone that didn't really see what that raise looked like, I just want to highlight a handful of the different parties involved. So this is from Ep.02. Yuga Labs seed round investors include Google, Samsung, Coinbase, FTX, Sandbox, Animocola, A16Z, Vayner, Adidas, Time, Genesis, and more. And it's also stated that all were required to own a Bored Ape Yacht Club or Mutant Ape Yacht Club to participate in the seed round. So again, just what a crazy time to be alive in the world of NFTs. So I've definitely got my own hot take on this, but Dan, I guess where do you want to start with it?
I'd love to start on that first tweet that you showed of just their kind of financials and the fact that I've never been a massive numbers guy. And, I'm sitting here with my co-host, Matt, who's a registered CPA. I don't think you need to be a CPA to look at that tweet and that little bulletproof spread of what's gone on in their financials to understand, whoa, this is really big. Like percentages anywhere in the 90s is like disturbing for profit margin. That's crazy. It's wild. And this valuation, we're going to get into, some of the specifics, but I hate to be quoted on this, but I've heard it said multiple times of being the largest in American business history for a brand that started this recent. So incredible there. And Matt, I know we actually had some team meetings with our Project LB52 squad. For those of you that don't know, we have our own NFT project, Project LB52. And we were meeting today on not specifically this subject, but it got pulled in naturally. And I'd love to kind of have you, Matt, go over some of the things that you were mentioning in the meeting today about just your comparisons to what you felt like this feels like in historic past, and just what you feel like this means for the space and things like that. Both the Ape coin, the valuation, and just generally Yuga Labs, the Larva Labs, this whole show. I'd love to get those thoughts that we kind of had in the meeting today, because a lot of value for people there. So hate to put you on the spot, but I'd love to hear your thoughts again.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll give you guys a quick summary, but I think we'll probably actually take that. I recorded that whole meeting, so I got a feeling we'll actually release that as another special episode of Degen Frens.
Gold.
It's just us and a few other friends hanging out. We are business partners and stuff like that. But again, just really sharing how big the market for Web3 and NFTs could become. I don't think it's predestined or guaranteed, but it really feels like we're moving in that direction, which is exciting for me. And I guess the first thing I'll kind of preface this with is I honestly believe we're so early that we can't really accurately predict where this is all going to go and what it's going to evolve into. And the analogy I was using in our meeting was, in my opinion, this essentially is the Dutch East India Company. So anyone that's not, up to snuff on their business history, that was the first company that really had stocks, and the stocks that were actively traded. And this represented a monumental shift in how humans organize capital and how we organize labor and how we just organize general efforts. Because what the Dutch East India Company has essentially evolved into was something on par or in comparison to like a multinational corporation, but so big and so powerful that arguably it was its own state actor. It may not have exactly like had a capital city the way we think of like state actors in the modern day, but understand it really did lead to the rise and development of the Dutch Empire. And a lot of those business practices and ideas around capital were quickly copied and brought over to Britain as well, which led to the British Empire and, the East India Company, the Hudson's Bay Company, all those other kind of state-sanctioned entities. And the reason I bring this up as an analogy is it's cliche at this point to talk about how early we are in the world of NFTs. But I honestly, in a way, kind of feel like people are underestimating how freaking early we are in this entire process. And that's why I want to highlight it. Like, think of businesses or stock markets today. Well, there's no way back in, I think it was like the 1610s or 1620s when the Dutch East India Company really got rolling, that we'd find ourselves today with like online stock trading and brokers, because at that moment in time, there was a stock market, but they literally traded in one stock, right? Which was the Dutch East India Company. And so the reason I want to highlight so much for anyone listening to this, why it's important to understand how early we are, is one, that company doesn't exist anymore. And so with honestly anything that we're currently seeing right now going on in Web3 and NFT, I don't think anything is absolutely guaranteed to be here a decade from now. However, if you're paying attention, if you've got your fingers on the pulse of what's going on in this space, there's a huge opportunity to grow and evolve with this space. And as long as you're tuned in, plugged in to what's going down, I don't think you have to worry about whether Yuga Labs goes on to become the Dutch East India Company or the British Empire. What you need to be plugged into is like, okay, there's going to be things that are going to be massive in this space. This is going to be a revolution in the way we treat fractional ownership, the way people like crowdsource or raise money and things of that nature. And that represents just massive opportunities. I was saying in the team meeting, I personally believe it's the most monumental opportunity I've ever seen in my lifetime. And again, I'll save you guys the Cole's notes for it so you can just jump over to that entire meeting. But like, I've been presented with some pretty good opportunities in my life, and yet I honestly think this still it pales in comparison to what I see playing out right now in Web3 and NFTs. So I could go on about this all day, but maybe you can jump in here, Dan, share a little bit of your perspective, and we'll just bounce back and forth on this and the other subjects.
For sure, man. I'm really glad. And again, I'm glad we're going to upload that meeting, because I think there was a lot of value there from yourself and just the whole team setting and swapping notes on the subject that we're talking on here today. And I think this is one of the most bullish signals I've seen while being a part of the space yet, of just the incredibly broad thinking team that is Yuga. Like the things that they're doing is, it's like, I know there's a lot of comparisons to things, and I won't use one here because there's a lot I can pull from, but I don't think there is one for Yuga. They're really forging their own frontier in the NFT space, and as Matt said, they might not necessarily be around in a decade, and that sounds crazy, but it's just speaks to how early things are, and this is all so new. But to see people really leaning into their dreams and just being able to think as big as they want and actually come through and accomplish it, which I think one of the biggest testaments was a project that started as a couple of friends, Bored Ape Yacht Club, degenning around, having fun in chat rooms, and then ending up using their tech skills to launch a 10K generative, to then within a year circle back and consume one of the largest, most historical 10K PFP projects. If you mentioned that as they were in those degen chat rooms just bubbling on the idea, they might have even thought that was crazy to think. But the fact that it's snowballing and just the mindset is clearly compounding of 1 win, we can do whatever we want. 2 wins, we can really, and as Matt said, I really want to stress that the power of that statement Matt made of, he's had some opportunities in his life, and you can check over Matt's story online, but to hear Matt say that this is one of the biggest opportunities, potentially he's ever seen, should speak volumes to not only myself, but other people listening. This is really big stuff here. And what Yuga's doing is another, again, signal to that, again, a statement like Matt's of just look around, look what's going on, look what people are creating for themselves. That can be you too. You just need to think it and believe it. And maybe we'll segue from this into that sentiment about what happened. Me and Matt were chatting privately in a messenger, and Matt was like, man, this is crazy. It'd be nuts to see one of these projects eventually start their own country or something or the other. And I go see on Twitter, not 4 hours later, that Gordon, one of the devs or one of the creators of Bored Ape Yacht Club, is toying with that idea and actually quote tweeted a politician's how to start a country kind of handbook thread. And just that type of endless, potential is really, really inspirational and motivating to somebody that's, just starting out as a creator and a collector. It's crazy. Honestly, this ApeCoin thing is a whole nother story, just in terms of the amount of value they've given back to sometimes everyday people. And Matt's a Bored Ape holder, so I'm sure he can weigh in here a little bit heavier, but the acquisition was crazy with Yuga Labs acquiring Larva Labs. And then, as Matt stated earlier on, being overshadowed, seems like a long shot, but it happened, by this ApeCoin. And it's really taken over Twitter. And I think it's going to definitely broaden out and start to take over the whole world. But what was your initial thoughts, Matt, about ApeCoin, receiving some for your ape holdings, and just the general value added back to holders through that coin?
Yeah, obviously it was a lot of fun to receive such a large value add, essentially, by being a Bored Ape Yacht Club hodler. Massive. But one of the thing you brought up, a bunch of different things there. The one thing I want to at least riff on a little bit here is that idea of starting a country. And that may sound like crazy, bombastic, whatever. And it is, right? There's only so many countries that ever start or exist or whatever. But for those of you that are maybe looking for a good book recommendation, I'd encourage you to check out the book, The Sovereign Individual. And so in this book, there's a lot of great subject matters brought up. But the overall general thesis is that we could see a lot more competition rising up amongst states, and states essentially competing for productive members of society. So the idea here is that we could see micro states, city states, and things like that kind of come back into vogue. And a big part of that is information in the internet and the leveling effect it had there. So for a really long time, the idea of traveling, right? If we go back even, let's call it 200 years in our past, the idea of traveling across the continent or across the world was a massive endeavor. and something that a lot of people couldn't even comprehend nor gain enough like access to information or resources to be able to execute upon. Where now in this day and age, it's much more achievable and comprehensible for the average person to be able to take something on like that. And the general thesis here is that we're going to continue down this path of like fracturing of these large massive states into smaller regions, you know, a more federalized system, a more balkanized system, whatever you kind of want to frame it as. And there's a lot of different ways this could play out. But I really do think that the big thing here that we're seeing playing out right now in real time with NFTs, Web3, and in particular the potential behind like Bored Ape Yacht Club is, you know, how people were talking like a year, well, not even a year ago, but like let's call it 8 months ago. How crazy would it be if and when, you know, Bored Ape Yacht Club buys like a massive club in Miami, and you know this is our like our access or our token to it? Yeah, that sounds freaking crazy back then, but now people are like, oh, that's like small potatoes. Like, don't play it safe. Like, push for something big. And for me, I think that we're going to see people flirting with this idea. Like right behind me is actually like, if you guys see my green screen, is my citadel. So this is like 20 acres of land I bought in northwestern Ontario, and I kind of want to build my own intentional community. Where the waterfront, as you can see, you know, surrounded by nature, provincial parks, crown land, and stuff like that. So it's amazing. But you know, I not that one shouldn't have to put in a lot of effort to be able to get those rewards, but like I had to grind, you know, from 20 until like 35, 36 before I had the resources, the capabilities, and the confidence to be able to execute on something like this. And I've wanted to have my own ecosystem, my own environment for a long time because I'm a massive believer you're the sum of your inputs, right? Like your inputs plus thoughts are going to lead to your actions and the results that you generate as like a machine or a human being. And so I see huge opportunities for communities of like-minded individuals to rally around this technology. Again, this idea of blockchain, of like blockchain ownership, of tethering the real world to the internet or blockchain, I think represents a new technological revolution that's going to drastically increase the timelines and facilitate what's discussed in things like the sovereign individual. So again, strongly encourage people, go read that book. It's relatively long, but it's on Audible as well, so you can just kind of listen to it. But that's what really excites me about all this. Now, again, is that to say that Bored Ape Yacht Club will go start their own country? I doubt it. But I think that we'll see people attempt different things, whether it's like, you know, private clubs or private clubs that have clubs in multiple different countries and states, right? It'll be this idea that's going to continue to evolve and blossom. And right now, like my craziest flights of fancy around this get me really excited. But I've got no doubt it will both grow and evolve in even stranger and bigger ways than what we can even like spitball right now.
Absolutely. And rolling off that, like just the sovereign, I guess it's not entirely sovereign, but this introduction with the ApeCoin DAO and the fact that the community now has, you know, some voting power. And I think that's really special. And even like rolling off of the Citadel, it's just like, that's the way things should be built, is with everybody having a say, no matter maybe I'm sure there's still a level of how much you hold or stake within the coin, that your voice becomes a little bit larger. But for the community to be able to drive some things and really have it say through this coin, I think it's special. And it speaks to, again, like sovereign individuals wanting to be in something a little bit more decentralized, where it's not to one point of failure. You're now in a decentralized, automated, or autonomous organization that just acts upon, you know, this input from the council, which is the holders, people that are invested in it. And we were talking earlier today that it's nice to see some of the, you know, the grassroots holders, not just big money, getting some kickback from it, and people that had the conviction in this project to mint it and hold it. And, you know, I think there's something to be said about those holders that maybe seemed insignificant in the beginning, but maybe were part of the drive for these ideas and to think bigger, because it all seemed like a meme. It all seemed like a joke, and like, yeah, we'll have a club, like Matt was saying, yeah. And within creating that light atmosphere and enabling people to think, you know, childlike and bigger, I think it's what has led them to their success. So it's almost like those little meme chatters in the Discord early on that might not even hold anymore were probably a pretty big role in this. And again, going back to the DAO, it's cool to see people that are holding these apes, no matter their status before, NFTs and things like that, be able to have a voice and get involved in stuff like that. So it's awesome. Just generally game changing stuff. And it's something I really want to follow behind, and it's hard not to feel a little bit intimidated by. But again, I think we're all capable because there's so much opportunity in this space. And maybe we'll share my screen real quick, Matt, and just show the origin tweet for the voting that is happening that I'm kind of referring to. So they launched ApeCoin from a separate account. And I think there's some strategic legal implications there and things like that to maybe look into. But checking out this tweet that, one ApeCoin equals one vote. So just like I'm saying, if you're a holder of the coin, not even necessarily the ape, you can kind of get involved. And there's some active voting going on right now. So we'll be curious to see what all the apes get together and decide their governance is going to do moving forward, and what kind of things they plan to implement, which I think I've heard rumblings of, staking, soft staking, things like that in the proposal. So it's really cool to see. And I suggest everyone hop over on Twitter, follow, ApeCoin, because I think there's going to be some big news coming from this account. And if you want to, keep your finger on the pulse, this is a good place to do it for sure. But yeah, generally a great little thread on just what's going on with voting. And I think if you're thinking about doing your own project, look to projects like this for how to structure it. Don't tell your whole following you can do a DAO and have no idea what goes into it. I think there's some big stuff that goes into it. And again, they might be a good resource to follow for the structure behind that.
Yeah, absolutely agree with you, Dan. And again, what I think is so unique about this moment in time with Web3 and NFTs is the degree and flexibility to how you decide to allow stakeholders to participate in whatever your underlying project is. And so, like, a few different examples, and to a certain extent, we've already got this spectrum in the existing economy, but it's not all housed under one umbrella. So right now, like, if you want to have individuals participate directly in the governance of your organization, we've got stocks. So literally you can have stocks. And again, there's a lot of securities regulations around that. It's difficult to just choose to launch your own publicly traded company. Oftentimes, for a lot of people, they end up deciding that it's actually more cost effective to acquire a shell company than to go through the hassle and disclosures of launching like a fresh, clean new entity. But again, we've also got like bonds, which essentially are like long-term loans from a business, right? With certain rights and things in regards to like where you line up in the list of creditors and when you get your money if the company essentially defaults or becomes insolvent. Then on the complete opposite side of the spectrum, we've literally got like you can just buy someone's product. So again, the only thing you're really voting there is voting with your dollars by participating or supporting that business. But a little bit less to the extreme, we've got concepts like crowdfunding, where it's like, again, maybe I get a little bit of an extra bonus, or if it doesn't hit a certain threshold, the product doesn't have quite as many features or doesn't have this bonus, that bonus. And again, if it doesn't even hit its minimum viableness, the project will never come into existence in the first place. And understand that with each of these different examples, there's also different like levels of risk. There's different levels of utility you receive and different levels of involvement you've got. And so all these pre-existing sort of forms of stakeholders or support of an individual project, or in this case, I'm primarily talking about businesses, that all already exists. But with NFTs, there's this great leveling event that I think is playing out right now. So when you look back to other technological revolutions, something that will often get brought up is like the printing press and how that was a game changer for information, for the average person's knowledge and learning capabilities and all that jazz. And absolutely it was. But at the same time, like books did exist before the printing press. It's just they couldn't exist in the same scale, the same quantities. And what that meant was it was much more restrictive to the types of books and information that was out there. And there was a lot more centralization around it because like, oh shit, you need to have the money to have someone hand scribe or hand copy what you were producing as a product. Whereas in the a post printing press world, all of a sudden the cost of production drops so dramatically that you could start having different people experiment and explore and create multiple copies of a piece of information, which also made it harder to censor that information. And so again, when I see what's playing out in Web3 and NFTs, it gets me so excited. Now, a lot of this activity right now is playing out on Ethereum. Maybe it does in the future, maybe it doesn't. There's a lot of different ways this could play out, but this underlying concept, I think, is here to stay. And so again, it could evolve in lots of different directions and iterations, and we'll see how that all plays out. But yeah, I just wanted to highlight that. And then one other point I wanted to bring up here is the idea of, again, participating in these projects or by being a stakeholder, by holding an NFT. A lot of these projects don't necessarily have to make the same sort of financial promises or financial disclosures if it's literally just a piece of art that maybe has upside, versus when we're talking about like stocks or bonds or, preferred shares and things of that nature. They're a bit more of a hybrid financial instrument, somewhere in between that concept of a bond and a stock. And so again, we can see different versions or synthesis kind of playing out from these underlying concepts that already exist in our economy, but they're being bred with Web3 and NFTs. And that just, to me, is so exciting. But talking about the idea of like microstates again, I think that we'll definitely see weird things play out, probably in the bigger fringes of society right now. So a lot of the stuff I'm going to talk about, will probably get, squashed in like the EU or China or the US, but has huge opportunities in areas like Latin America, Africa, other areas that are probably underdeveloped where they're a little bit faster and loose with laws and the rule of law. But I could see states within states where essentially like you as a community get together, you've got your own microstate in this bigger state, and you're literally just having to maybe tip or pay your property taxes, but within you've got complete governance over what goes on in your little microstate. And again, the idea of like having to like buy your passport or buy your participation in this on the surface might sound like, oh, that's weird. But actually, like the more you look into it, the idea of like what people call gold passports or golden passports, if I remember correctly, what that means is essentially you can like buy your stateship, right? You can buy a passport. If you have enough money, you get to play in this country without necessarily having to go through the same framework that someone without money would do in order to get access to it. And again, circling back to the idea of the sovereign individual, this is a great way to incentivize or attract certain groups of people. And I can see this playing out in just like every flavor of society and humanity. So again, maybe you're like, I don't know, maybe you've got the most hardcore hobby around skiing and like skiing is life. And so like up until this point in time, you could maybe, get a membership. Maybe you got on like the board of your local ski operation. And that's like to the full extent that you get to participate and exist there. But we'll see literally communities, if there's enough demand, pop up that like, we're going to build or acquire our own ski resort, and you can live here 24/7. You can participate, you can vote, you potentially could even financially benefit from the success or failure of this. And it creates a whole different level of like fandom or buy-in from the individual stakeholders that are supporting this underlying entity.
This is going to be a packed one, dude. There was some alpha in there for sure. And just the way NFTs can play into that and that be the kind of technology that's the backbone that all of that stuff relies on to, again, prove, your citizenship or your ownership or your involvement within this community or any community for that matter, I think is incredible. And, I'm a musician, so I'm always fanatic about how it relates to music and tracking sales. But imagine being able to track that proof of involvement, we'll call it, in whatever community and see, somebody actually, maybe their life went in a different direction and they chose to sell their stake or to sell their involvement within that community. And I think even that in itself is pretty wild to think about. Like, I don't want to be a part of this anymore. And you're able to maybe actually sell what you initially invested in for whatever the going rate of that, proof of involvement is. But the tracking of it, the proof of it, the changing of hands, the trading of it can all really be done with blockchain and NFT technology. So it's incredible. And I think Matt's doing a great job of starting to think about what some of those use cases can be. And it's very interesting to think about IRL communities, but also the exact same scenario you just described, but in a metaverse scenario. When we get there, technology isn't quite immersive enough to be wearing a VR set all day, but who knows, as things grow, it may become, to be a participant or involved in this game or this metaverse community. It could be all based around an NFT as well. So the future is so bright. And, going back to the initial, like Yuga and Larva and all these big players we're seeing, they're proving what we're saying right now, right? That like it's just the beginning. It's so early because people said this wasn't possible up until this point, and now it's reality. And I think it's really titillating to think what's beyond, what can blossom even further that people say is impossible, that say it can't happen. And that could look like everything we've talked about here and even more.
Mm-hmm. And I think another big thing to understand is, decentralization gets thrown around a lot in the space, and there is definitely a lot of aspects that aren't as decentralized as you might at first assume they are. And so it's important to understand not every playground is created equal right now. There's definitely points of failure or centralization in a lot of the projects that are playing out. But I personally think that on a long enough time horizon, if we start to see centralization creep in too much into any one given ecosystem, whether it's like Ethereum or OpenSea or whatever it is, we'll eventually see real degens migrate, and they'll like essentially, there's this concept like or a joke in engineering that as long as there's enough motivation behind something, that humans can solve any problem, right? And so it's really about understanding that those constraints drive the innovation that we experience. And right now, one of the constraints I see playing out a lot in the content world is sadly like cancel culture. And recently there was just another round of people that got banned with no notice off of Patreon. And this can have a huge impact if that's your number one source of income, right? We see people being banned. I'm constantly like rechecking whether the maple pill is going to be banned on YouTube, right? Where right now, that's where more than 25% of my views come from YouTube. And so again, if I was to disappear off YouTube, I immediately am not as connected to my audience as I'd like to be. Right now, a lot of individuals feel like they have to moderate themselves, moderate their views in order to avoid cancel culture. But it feels like what's admissible, what's allowable in culture continues to shrink in. And while that's very frustrating in the moment, I think this is going to drive a completely new way for fans and stakeholders of content to help participate in the creation of that content, right? And obviously that's something that we're trying to do with music in regards to Project LB52, but it doesn't matter whether you're talking about your favorite comedian, favorite musician, any of these things. There's now, at least in theory, the opportunity to really decentralize that relationship and yet still have that stakeholder, whether it's just a fan or a financial supporter or someone that's going to actually directly be involved in influencing the art or the creative process. You now can kind of choose your own adventure as a creator, as an artist in that regards. And like, it honestly just feels limitless in my opinion. And it's so important right now because whether people want to admit it or not, we're currently witnessing a cultural civil war breakout in the West, in particular in North America and Europe. But again, this is playing out to some degree everywhere. And any and all technological innovation that can help drive improvements in individual freedoms and access to information is a huge net positive, in my opinion. And again, that's a big part of why I'm just so amped about everything I see playing out. Now, again, critics of me being amped about this would be like, yo, man, you're literally cheering on centralization, right? Like right now, you're talking about how exciting it is the Bored Ape Yacht Club acquired Larva Labs, two of their biggest projects. And like, yeah, I get it, but they don't have to. And if you don't like it, you can go create and launch your own product and your own project. Where like in the past, think back to before cable television, there was 3 TV channels, right? Like you had the big 3 in the United States. In Canada, we had like CBC. And you had these state broadcasters that really restricted access to information and who got platformed. We've seen a massive improvement, but it's not been perfected on social media. And unfortunately, we're starting to see a slow drift back towards centralization in that space. But I think the underlying thesis, as well as just like the ecosystem that currently is Web3, while it will tolerate a lot of centralization, it at a moment's notice, if there's enough demand amongst the plebs, we can just pivot, right? Us to can just swear off anything and everything. And we're not restricted the same way as we would have ever been in the past in regards to the technology there. And that to me is just, that's why I get so hyped about all this jazz.
And like kind of building upon that, you don't see too much gatekeeping from big dogs like Bored Ape Yacht. There's almost none, if any. So yet, yeah, they're centralizing in terms of, acquiring some of the biggest projects. They're now the biggest kind of giant in the space, but I've yet to see any throttling of another project because of that. Them using that power and that figure that they've acquired in any sort of swaying way. And I guess we're early yet in terms of their size, and they're still growing, and there's still, room for negative to happen just as much as there is for positive. But I think there's something to be said about, there was a project that popped up literally like 48 hours ago. And within that 48 hours was in between Bored Ape Yacht Club and Mutant Ape Yacht Club's volume. The project's Goops may have heard of it, but it was this new project that just literally came out of nowhere and is doing, probably within a certain time frame, volume that's in the same realm as Bored Ape Yacht Club. And nobody in terms of the larger giants bat an eyelash. I'm sure they're applauding, saying good for this artist, good for this dev team, good for the community that's involved. This is good for all of us. So I think there's something to be said for that as things in some sense get a little more centralized. It's a different type. Like, as Matt said, we can all choose to vote with our dollars and our attention and go somewhere else. But even in that same breath, the larger entities choose to use their power differently and don't bully as much. And again, we're early. I'm not naive to say that will never happen or can never happen. But at this current state, it's a lot more of a, we all win together. So when you see things like this happen for any of those naysayers, most of us degens just go hoorah, because it's pushing us all in the right direction. And there's not much negativity within the space from what I've seen. So, again, something to be said about just big dogs playing nice. Like, that's, we need more of that.
Mm-hmm.
But otherwise, as far as like Yuga, ApeCoin, and all that, Matt, what's maybe something walking away from this episode that you're like extremely excited about potentially happening or bullish on?
Yeah, I think all of it is just overall bullish for NFTs in general. It's definitely created a new hype and news cycle around all the recent announcements that Yuga Labs has had. If I had to pick like the one individual, I guess like secretly I hold a handful of these, but I hope that we see new life breathed into Meebits. They always kind of felt like the red-headed stepchild of like blue chips, where again, for me, I get why they didn't get massive traction initially, because it just didn't seem like Larva Labs explained why we should care about it. And I think Larva Labs was really expecting the community to do it through like things like the Meebits DAO and other aspects of just like the community choosing to get together and build ecosystems where these assets could interact with the greater metaverse. I really trust, at least at this point in time, the Bored Ape Yacht Club team to drive some really exciting things to play out for Meebits as well as for CryptoPunks. It was awesome that they gave full rights to the individuals around our CryptoPunks. So again, that's big. I think it will take time though for the ecosystem that is CryptoPunks to evolve, simply because a lot of people that would have started businesses based around their CryptoPunk were essentially limited in that regards, because I might be misremembering my history here, but I think it was like you could make money off your punk up to like $100,000 USD a year or something like that. And while that again would allow like hobbyists to enter the space, it's going to restrict someone like Arizona T, which bought a Bored Ape Yacht Club a while ago, and, kind of tease that they were going to use it on can designs, right?
Mm,
And so for anyone looking to build massive brands around the IP that they'd acquired, it just wasn't there because of those restrictions when it came to CryptoPunks. So I personally think that on a long enough time horizon, we're going to see really some fun products and businesses grow or blossom out of the CryptoPunk ecosystem, but it might take a while. Because
yeah.
again, I think a lot of existing hodlers weren't hodling for that reason because it was explicitly restricted based upon how Larva Labs initially developed the IP. And with us now being granted it, it represents a huge opportunity, but I think it'll take a while for people to choose. And again, I don't think you'll see the same sort of grassroots brands creep up in that space the way it did in apes, because like
Mm,
I remember when I first got my apes, like I had like 1 ETH and 5 ETH. There was dudes acquiring it because they owned a microbrewery and they wanted to be able to put like, their ape on a can, or they want to start like a small little boutique coffee shop or things like that. And so I think just the inherent floor price right now of CryptoPunks will um inherently mean less innovation and less IP usage at the start, but on
mm.
a long enough time horizon, I'm definitely bullish about that. How about
Yeah,
you, Dan?
which is honestly, that's just I'm fired up to hear that because you've been talking, smiling upon Meebits even before the IP rights were released. So, Meebits and Punks now kind of having their chains off and some new leadership. I definitely agree there. Like there's some new growth, but absolutely agree with that's going to take some time. And I'm sure Yuga, which is now Larva, has quite the team and they're growing, but there's work involved. So things like that do take some time to grow and for the community to grab onto that and start using that IP in their own fun ways. And behind me, I always move the wrong way, but we got Spotty. Why do I keep doing that? Spotty, who's using that IP and has been for some time. And I think maybe some deep down in his bones knew that this would happen. But he's a smart cat and was probably playing in the lines before that. But it'll be exciting to see some more punks, hopefully used in these fun ways like apes and things like that. Generally, rolling off today's meeting and filming this episode, I'm just incredibly fired up about Web3, about NFTs, about what we're doing within it and plan to do, going forward, and just taking so much inspiration from Yuga and Larva and all of these other projects that we are, talking about in this show and shows going forward. It's, the true wag me, we're all going to make it attitude of watching other people win just makes me want to win and see community and decentralized develop. So we'll see what happens going forward, and we'll definitely keep a close eye, on Degen Frens with the developing story that is Bored Ape Yacht Club, Yuga, Larva, ApeCoin, and all those things, and we'll tap back in. But Matt and I definitely wanted to do a kind of different episode, second episode, stray away from the usual and dive really deep into this kind of big news within the Degen space and just, free riff on it. So any other thoughts on this, Matt?
No, I think we've covered, at least I've got a lot off of my chest that I want to cover in this episode. So appreciate everyone listening to this. If you guys got value, please do smash the like button, hit subscribe on whatever platform you're listening to us on as well. You can find me anywhere and everywhere on social media. It'll either be Matt McKeever 85 or it'll be Matt McKeever Unfiltered. Really appreciate you guys following and engaging with the content. I love it when it becomes a two-way conversation. And a quick reminder, if you guys want to make this a two-way conversation, make sure you join the Project LB52 Discord. We're going to be creating a separate channel on there where essentially it'll just be for Degen Frens. So if you guys have hot takes, if you think we misspoke, if you want to fact check us, all that stuff can be done there on the Project LB52 Discord. And we'll have links in the video description down below to everything.
For sure. Yeah. Check that description. There's always some good stuff down there. And, give us some positive reinforcement or negative, whatever it is. Just give us your vibes down below and help us out in the algorithm or tear us down. It's whatever, we're Degens. We're going whichever way the tide goes. And as always, we're powered by Project LB52 here. So check out www.projectlb52.com and you can find everything you need to know about our project and what we're doing with music NFTs and bringing that utility. But until next time, This has been Degen Frens, and we'll see you in the next one. Have a great rest of your day, everybody.
Thanks, guys.